I've been thinking about the moon, almost of nothing else. She disappears, returns brighter than ever, trailing borrowed light, lifted into the morning's heart, the pale ghost of earthshine rounding her belly, curved and pristine. When I look away, she sinks again, or is swallowed by the clouds, leaving me to await her return. So it's the middle of February right now, and it's a brutally cold winter in Warsaw, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere or warming up at all. But I have a bit of time off, so I thought it would be a nice time to begin another reading diary. And since my preoccupations have led me to think a lot about the moon, I thought it would be interesting to make this one a kind of lunar reading diary. The moon has been the subject of much of my reading lately. And so I thought I could look at some books that do something interesting involving the moon. Apart from the first book I'm going to be talking about, I haven't decided exactly what to include in this reading diary, but I wanted to make sure that it was not simply science fiction that's set on the moon, but although that wouldn't exclude a book necessarily, but I thought it would be more interesting to look at books that deal with the moon perhaps metaphorically or symbolically, or that are interested in lunar mythology. And if you have any favourite books or books that you've read that you think do that in interesting ways, I'd love to hear about them in the comments, so do let me know. Along the way, I hope to note some curious lunar manifestations in literature, moments when the moon has risen to illuminate the manuscript, the scroll, the page. In my explorations, I was fascinated to find that the moon is inextricably bound up with the origins of authorship itself. The Sumerian priestess Enchedwana, whose soaring and sometimes acerbic epic hymns and temple hymns, composed in the 3rd millennium BC, comprise the earliest instances of literary text ascribed to an individual author. Enchedwana served as high priestess of Nana, the Mesopotamian moon god, and some sources interpret her name itself as including a reference to the moon. As Rebecca Boyle notes in her wonderful book, Our Moon, Enchedwana is a nom de plume. En translates to lady, high priestess, combined with chedu, which means ornament, followed by An, the sky god, and Na. Her name means high priestess of the ornament of the sky, that is, of the moon. On those clay tablets, moonlight sharpens the grooves of cuneiform script, illuminating all the acts of human imagination in their wake. I first came across Steve Moore's Somnium in an essay by Alan Moore called Unearthing, and it was a piece that originally appeared in Ian Sinclair's anthology, London City of Disappearances, in which he asked writers to choose as their subject something that was perhaps moribund in the city, something that was fading or soon to be no longer with us. And Alan Moore decided to write about his good friend Steve Moore, no relation, as he continually reminds us. I think he even joked that should appear on both of their gravestones. And it's truly an extraordinary piece of writing, I think. It's sort of half biographical essay, half poetic meditation on Steve Moore's imagination, his imaginative life, I suppose, and his career as a comics writer, sinologist, and then later a novelist. And I think if anyone's only read Alan Moore's comics, then this might show off a different side of him. I think it's an utterly beautiful piece. But ever since I read it, I've been very keen to try Steve Moore's novel, and a lunar reading diary seemed just the place to do that for me. So I'm going to have to put my hat on because it's absolutely freezing, even though it's ridiculous colour. Forgive me. I'm about 100 pages into Somnium right now, perhaps a bit over that, and I'm enjoying it so much. I have to say, it's really hitting some kind of sentimental spot within me, something that I seem to crave right now. And it's written in a sort of chivalric mode, full of sort of archaic, courtly sentiments, and it has a really interesting structure. It's sort of novel within a novel, but perhaps even more expansive than that. It seems to just be beginning to show its hand in those terms, but I'm really curious to see where it goes. Somnium calls itself a fantastic romance, and this archaic subtitle offers a sense of the novel's flavour. It opens in the early years of the 19th century and is told through the journal of a moonstruck romantic, Christopher Morley, who is leaving London, leaving his sister Liz, for whom he harbours a love so strong it can only be improper. He sequesters himself at the Bull Inn at Shooter's Hill, high above London, in order to be alone, to write beneath the moon. The narrative work he embarks upon, our novel within a novel, is itself a fantastic romance set in the 16th century, the tale of Endymion Lee, a courtier under Elizabeth I. The tale begins to take shape, and before long, the dream Christopher has constructed is so vivid that it comes to reorganize his waking life, and the thin veil between the two worlds begins to lift. The influence of the moon, at which he looks every night, grows and grows. The book has a really strong lunar pedigree. It's utterly drenched in lunar mythology, making reference to the myth of Diana and Actaeon, as written about by Ovid, draws on Lucian of Samosata's journeys to the moon. The novel's treatment of the myth of Diana and Actaeon is a favourite moment so far. Its charged eroticism and shame is intensified by its relation as a dream vision experienced by Christopher. The glowing woods thick around him now, and grown so strange, with flowery vines strung all about, and orchids blazing quite too brilliant, and moonlit moths of giant size drank up fluorescent nectar through their long and coiling tongues. And amid this perfumed wood, he spies Diana, bathing, naked and pink, her perfect body bared to his gaze, a voyeuristic fantasy made flesh, droplets of foaming water outlining her marble curves under the light of a brilliant moon. Lunar Diana, quite unaware until her gaze falls upon his own, revealing not scorn, imprecations, but something far worse, only pity, tenderness, and vast compassion. And in that glance he felt his soul was damned, for secret looks had stolen something which, he knew, upon the mere request, she would have given freely. Bounding through the thickets then,
He wondered at his 4-foot gait, wildered more at silvered antlers on his head, and whimpered in his mind to see the short white fur that covered all of him. His cloven hooves clicked sharply on the ground. Dreams and all their portents are at the very heart of this lunar narrative.
And of course, the title, Somnium, which in Latin means the dream, is a kind of innate reference to Johannes Kepler.
When I was at university, I took a course entitled Early Modern Fantasies, run by the poet Andrea Brady, whose classes had an atmosphere of icy scorn that made them quite intimidating. But it was this class that informed my understanding of science fiction, not as something that began in the 19th century with Mary Shelley, Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, but a far more expansive tradition. The course featured a number of texts about journeys to the moon, including Francis Godwin's The Man in the Moon of 1638, which was the inspiration for Cyrano de Bergerac's L'Autrement ou les États et Empires de la Lune. But it also introduced me to the German astronomer Johannes Kepler's Somnium, or the Dream, composed in Latin in the first decade of the 17th century. Kepler used this narrative form and the veil of a dream in order to espouse his scientific convictions in a time when orthodoxy still largely opposed Copernicanism. The dream vision, so often a literary means of distancing, a cloak that muffles that which is invidious, perilous, or painful, is also central to Steve Moore's approach in his novel.
And the book has a really distinct lovelorn flavour. It has these continuous overtones of yearning and sometimes a really powerful eroticism and longing that's quite seductive and inescapable.
The moon, as well as being an embodiment of Christopher Morley's desires and longing, is also a triangulation point for lovers. He speaks of how it was the comfort of his distant sister Liz to look upon the moon whilst knowing that I did the same. The moment brought to mind for me the tanka of Izumi Shikubu, the late 10th and early 11th century Heian poet, who employs the moon so often as the triangulation point of lovers in the same manner. Where are you hurrying to? You will see the same moon tonight wherever you go. Or, if, however far away, he were watching the lingering moon with a heart at all like mine, surely this clear sky would be filled with clouds. The moon appears too in her final poem, believed to have been composed on her deathbed. In the original Japanese, the final word is moon, or tsuki, making it perhaps the very last word she ever wrote. The way I must enter leads through darkness to darkness. O moon above the mountain's rim, please shine a little further on my path.
Alan Moore in Unearthing makes much of these elements and reads them as autobiographical.
Alan Moore's Unearthing presents a long-standing obsession with the Greek lunar goddess Selene, of whom Steve Moore paints a portrait that stands by his bedside in the room where he spent most of his life.
Back in the bedroom of the house where he's lived all his life, Steve Moore lies facing shelves of I Ching reference volumes, fast asleep on his right side so as to soothe that faltering gurgle in the ventricles, not half a dozen paces from the spot where he was born. Close to his face, upon a book-bare ledge, stands framed the gem-like miniature he painted during April 1989, a portrait of Selene, Greek moon goddess, Moon herself, naked and white, the sable-stippled cunt, the eyes and lips that seem to move beneath the glass, fogged by a silvery aerosol, his every night breath.
Alan Moore describes Steve Moore's failed relationships in this world, the reaching out of a hand, the pain when it is released, handed back, that agony of near requital. He searches for love nearby.
He has his hand read by a friend of Ian Will, the hero in Ken Campbell's Fortean caper, and is told that when he's 27, he will meet the woman he is meant for. Mantically misled, on reaching the appointed age in June 76, he misidentifies a wan but personable co-worker at the shop as his intended, but she's not. She's not. She's got a boyfriend, got a monkey, and the rail track creases in his palm were wrong, led only to this disused branch line, this neglected siding.
He searches for love at a distance, finding it with a Brazilian practitioner of tantric yoga, but this too is not to be.
Late 2000, early 2001, he gets the email from Brazil that he's been half expecting, breaking off the romance. They're in different hemispheres, they're under different moons, they need less space.
Yet another hopeful romance ends, and Alan Moore charts the manner in which these personal catastrophes become the bricks and mortar in the architecture of Steve Moore's novel.
And all this sentimental sediment is filtered through the whiskey into Somnium, the plot of which has by now crystallised into a mirror, is about a lovelorn writer who appears to be losing his mind on top of Shooter's Hill. It's around this point that he receives a message from his Westcliff wisp of smoke, never exactly an old flame, inviting him as a much-valued chum to share her happiness at finding a new boyfriend, and it all comes down on him at once. The loss of his Brazilian woman, a deferred ache, and now this. The long shot everything was riding on, gone down at the first fence. He's drinking, riding on the red-eye, and in Somnium his anguished 19th century narrator's drinking too. He wants to die. He's dreaming blocks of excavated architecture from his novel, just like his increasingly deranged protagonist. Exquisite marble shards of an Elizabethan buried moon town poking up from cellar floors out of the hilltop dirt.
As his romantic endeavours are thwarted, his longing for companionship hanging in shreds, whose tatters begin to wrap themselves not only around his literary work, but around the body of the goddess, who takes on more and more brilliant form. Alan Moore recounts a visit during which the goddess is ritually manifested.
So, he's sitting upright on my sofa, leaned against its back, his arms hung limp down by his sides, and he asks if I'm ready to begin, and like a twat, I say yes, and he shuts his eyes. Oh, Chaire Selene, oh, Chaire Selene, oh, Chaire Selene. Oh no, oh yes, oh fuck, she's blue. Electric ultraviolet blue on her illuminated contours, see-through in the shadows like a special effects hologram. She's riding him, she's straddling his lap, her narrow back is turned towards me, and she's nothing like her picture, nothing like the way he sees her and describes her. Skinny as a rake, she looks about 15, looks Turkish, naked. Not even a moon crown, a Stephane. There's just a narrow band around her forehead, holding back her long hair that's blue-black, not auburn. And there at the front, a solitary peacock feather, sticking up but curling to a crescent at its tip. Oh, Chaire Selene. Oh, Chaire Selene. Oh, Chaire Selene. The gaze, so full of sex and invitation and vitality that it's like stepping on a third rail, clenching both hands on a cattle fence. You can't let go, you can't let go. These are the violet eyes of beautiful Bohemia. This is the radiant face of Jazz herself, and her perfume is Gaudi, is Magritte, is Baudelaire and Satie. new gates burning in the corners of her smile, and we've all had her. There's no man or woman that I know who hasn't spent an hour, a night between her thighs, lapping the moon foam, drowning in her, worshipping, but not like him, not like this. She's theology in flames, her perfect archetypal arse, a noon blue apple, shifting restless in his lap as she attempts to twist her torso round, fluorescence pooling in its hollows, tries to look at me across her shoulder. Oh, Chaire Selene, oh, Chaire Selene, oh, Chaire Selene. And then he moves. He sits up on the sofa, opening his eyes, and she's dispersed. The signal breaks up in a luminous mauve talcum, and we lose her.
Structurally, the novel is doing some really interesting things with its sort of metafictional component. Of course, it's a novel within a novel, but Steve Moore does a little bit more with that than you might expect. There are moments, of course, when these two fictions echo one another, but moments when they blur into one another and it becomes uncertain which is a dream, which is reality. And those metafictional games sort of expand outward to include Steve Moore himself. Christopher Morley, the novel's main protagonist, its 19th century protagonist, gradually becomes more and more aware of this other moon lover, this poet writing in adoration of the moon 2 centuries hence, in the same spot on Shooter's Hill.
In this blurring of the nocturnal, moonlit world, the world of dreams, and its diurnal counterpart, I was reminded of Steve Moore's career as a sinologist, hearing a structural echo in Somnium of the famous butterfly dream from On the Equality of Things in Zhuang Zhou. Once, Zhuang Zhou dreamed he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering about, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know that he was Zhuang Zhou. Suddenly, he woke up, and there he was, solid and unmistakable Zhuang Zhou. But he didn't know if he was Zhuang Zhou who had dreamt that he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming that he was Zhuang Zhou. Christopher Morley will express similar doubts that emerge from the dreams he constructs by night on the page. I write, but when I do, I'm not quite sure who I am. I wonder if perchance I do not write at all, but that all my words are written for me by that man 2 centuries hence. And then I read my lines again and think they're from some ancient book discovered in a tomb. But most of all, I like to think they whisper sweetly from the moon. Morley even comes to think of their entanglement as a kind of music. I thought of him who was not born, wondered if he thought of me, long dead. Some part of us, we spoke together, though it was not ever quite with words. I confess it made my hair stand up. I thought that we were counterpoint on a single harpsichord, though who was the right hand, who the left, I could not quite decide.
And of course, Alan Moore's Unearthing adds an extra layer to the novel's life, as it were, rewriting the fictional back into Steve Moore's reality. I think particularly of Alan Moore's descriptions of Steve Moore living a kind of domestic life with this lunar goddess.
Life at Jim and Mary's 1930s dream home soon gets back to normal, but with a Greek goddess lodging there in the back bedroom. He cuts down the drinking drastically and keeps up the Selenic ritual practices in one form or another. Even now his hermitry has ended. His relationship with her becomes domestic, comfortable, as his relationship with his imagination similarly sees improvements, unsurprisingly, when that's the faculty in him she represents.
And then, of course, there's simply the novel's love of the moon for its own sake, which is something that I have tremendous sympathy for right now. I've been sort of more conscious of the moon than ever before in my life, and trying to make a note of where it's going to rise and set, when I will be able to see it, and what phase it will be in. Of course, right now there's no moon visible in the cloud cover. The skies are dark and grey.
Sometimes, even when the moon disappears in a blank sky, I sense that tug on my blood, the swelling of those tides within me, and her gravitational pull seems at times stronger than that of the earth. I imagine myself tumbling skyward, emerging above the cloud banks and into her lunar embrace. For Christopher Morley in Somnium, the moon, in addition to its own silvered loveliness, is beautiful for its protean inconstancy. It becomes by turns an embodiment of the women in his life, all of whom swirl in a confused orbit around that celestial body, leaping up free from earth to sky, so round, so golden pink, so huge. She is at once as bright as his sister Lizzie's eyes. As the orange moon, she is Cynthia Brown Eyes, proprietress of the Bull Inn. When the reddishness fades, she is Diana Regina, lover of Endymion Lee in the lunar palace of Somnium. A blue so deep and gold so bright, and there was music in the moon, lute notes so bright and sweet and full of light, so liquid. And then she was Selene, silvering all the world around me, and all of alchemy was sparkling in her light. She shone into my eyes and quite transmuted my brain. My blood, it then was quicksilver. My limbs were carved of crystal. I could not move an inch.
I think it would be a good idea for me to learn something more about this Greek lunar goddess Selene. So when I get home, I'm going to consult my Oxford Classical Dictionary and see what I can learn about it.
The Oxford Classical Dictionary informs me that Selene is the Greek moon goddess, daughter of the Titans Hyperion and Thea, according to Hesiod. Selene drives the moon chariot, drawn by a pair of horses or oxen. She has few myths, but the best known is the story of her love for Endymion, central, of course, to Steve Moore's novel. This love caused Zeus to cast Endymion into an eternal sleep in a cave on Mount Latmus, where Selene visits him. The myth has a pedigree in English literature, most notably in the epic Endymion, completed by the Romantic poet John Keats in 1818. It had been some time since I read it, but revisiting it now, I'm struck by the enormous beauty of the first airy, visionary appearance of the moon goddess.
Methought I lay watching the zenith, where the Milky Way among the stars in virgin splendour pours, and travelling my eye until the doors of heaven appeared to open for my flight. I became loath and fearful to alight, from such high soaring by a downward glance, so kept me steadfast in that airy trance, spreading imaginary pinions wide. When, presently, the stars began to glide and faint away before my eager view, and lo, from opening clouds I saw emerge the loveliest moon that ever silvered o'er a shell for Neptune's goblet. She did soar so passionately bright, my dazzled soul, commingling with her argent spheres, did roll through clear and cloudy, even when she went at last into a dark and vapoury tent, whereat methought the lidless-eyed train of planets all were in the blue again. To commune with those orbs, once more I raised my sight right upward, but it was quite dazed by a bright something sailing down apace, making me quickly veil my eyes and face. Again I looked. She had indeed locks bright enough to make me mad, and they were simply Gordioned up and braided, leaving in naked comeliness unshaded her pearl-round ears, white neck, and orbed brow, the which were blended in, I know not how, with such a paradise of lips and eyes, blush-tinted cheeks, half smiles and fairest sighs. Ah, see her hovering feet, more bluely veined, more soft, more whitely sweet, than those of sea-born Venus, when she rose from out her cradle shell. The wind outblows her scarf into a fluttering pavilion. 'Tis blue and overspangled with a million of little eyes, as thou wert to shed over the darkest, lushest bluebell bed handfuls of daisies.
The parallels in Somnium are many. The figures of Christopher Morley and more patently Endymion Lee, who carries his name, are stand-ins for the folkloric or classical figure of Selene's lover. Mount Latmus is embodied in Shooter's Hill, the Bull Inn, the cave where Endymion, beloved of the moon, sleeps and is visited. And yet there is also a sense in which the author Steve Moore sees himself in his place. In Alan Moore's Unearthing, Steve Moore wakes up in the early morning after having conducted his first solo ritual of worship to hear a single whispered word in his ear: Endymion. I take a trip to Antykwariat Kwadryga. I'm looking for a copy of Na Srebrnym Globie, the first part of his Lunar trilogy, his Trylogia Księżycowa. I know Kwadryga to be a great place for such things, but unfortunately they don't have a copy. Instead, I peruse the shelves, soak up some of that ambient serenity found only in the company of old books, and pick up a few postcards from their enormous collection to use later as bookmarks.
So the weather is quite a bit nicer today than when I last spoke to you. It's one of those bright, still days. The sky's clear, but there's still hard frost and snow on the ground. I like winter days like this. So I've come to the park, and I thought it would be nice to chat to you again about Steve Moore's Somnium. So I'm quite a bit further along than before. I'm well over halfway now, and I'm still absolutely loving this book. I love its unabashed sentimentality and romantic qualities, and I love how expansive it's grown, both
upwards and downwards, as it were. It sort of raised itself up into the firmament and dug down into the bowels of the earth. And that, I don't know what you'd call it, not bidirectionality, that kind of vertical expansion in both directions, is a sort of embodiment of one of the major themes of the book that's begun to emerge. This contradiction, tension between fantasy and reality, between the waking world and the world of dreams. It seems to be absolutely central to this book. And as I suspected it would, the book has also expanded in terms of its metafictional qualities, so that in addition to the novel's foundations, which I could describe as sort of sedimentary, it has this tripartite temporal structure, so that we have the layering of the Tudor period, the 19th century, and this hovering spectral presence of the 21st century reality in which Steve Moore is composing the novel that we're reading. And interestingly, this sort of fracturing of those time periods, sort of interference from one period to another. The texts themselves emerge in different time periods, or kind of pierce through the layers and become sort of aware of one another in a way that reminded me of certain parts of Alan Moore's From Hell, actually. This tripartite narrative structure at first imposes a hierarchy, with our 19th century component standing foremost, wielding a kind of fictional supremacy above the other time periods. And yet, as the tale progresses and grows more complex, the hierarchy begins to dissolve, the tale of Endymion Lee in the 16th century sharpening, finding structural echoes in the 19th century. The fragments of the lunar palace of Somnium excavated in the basement of the Bull Inn, an expansive spatial echo to the narrative's distension. Christopher Morley questioning his own recollections, recounted in the diary he keeps. The figures of Cynthia, Lizzie, Diana, and Selene merging until the walls of the narrative structure begin to collapse under the weight of dreams, and Christopher Morley's diary appears as yet another fiction in the palace of Somnium's lunar library, perused by Endymion Lee 200 years before it was composed. What he read was nothing but a journal, though how his mind did reel to read its dating, which began September 1803. He wondered how he could be reading a journal written 2 centuries up ahead, and as he did, he found one Morley writing a narrative that it seemed was nothing more nor less than that same story that he had lived through, which spoke plainly of Endymion Lee, long dead by then, and of his dear Diana.
But on top of this already quite complex, striated layering, there's a further piling up of textual fragments. There are plays and short stories and prose sketches, and somehow this metafictional layering contributes, I think, to that core tension at the heart of the book between fantasy and reality, between dreams and the waking world. And the result of all this textual layering, I think, is that we constantly are required to question the status of what we're reading, to question whether it is a reality, a dream, a fictional construction. And this is something that the characters themselves do Kit Morley in particular, the central 19th century protagonist, often records things in his journal only to revisit them and question whether they have truly occurred or not. And it's my feeling that the book encourages us to sort of favour the dream world. There's this really strong sense of rejecting the contemporary, rejecting the mundane.
The layering up of a huge variety of forms, the verse play, the dream vision, the journal, poems, the novel, and even the decadent short story, endless fictions within fictions, not only offers Steve Moore an opportunity to demonstrate his mastery of a variety of styles of composition, but also raises a question about the status of fictional reality. The presence of the physical, written documents that interfere with one another through these temporal layers are refracted in a dazzling prismatic array, such that the document we hold in our hands, Steve Moore's Somnium, seems to become yet another of these documents. The plane of reality that we ourselves inhabit is absorbed into the endless series of mirrors within the book's pages. The world is moonstruck, imbued now with that radiant glamour, its outlines silvered under the vivifying rays of our unregarded, neighbouring celestial body.
And I think this is all echoed in the book's religious sentiments, or its attitudes towards religion. It's a deeply anti-Christian book. Its characters reject Christian morality, and what it seems to idealize is a sort of pagan voluptuousness, a kind of classical luxuriation in the pursuit of desire.
As Morley rails in his journal, "You dwellers here below, all strange and too perverse, invented up the church, an institution of the mad, that kept your souls in thrall. And never then was loving eye upon the moon, no compliments paid to lunar beauty, except they called it sin, and all the poetry departed from the world." Rebecca Boyle in Our Moon attributes a similar process to the advance of scientific interest in the moon, as the first serious telescopic investigations transformed its shape in the imagination.
After spending millennia as a perfect sphere representative of the divine, the moon became earthy in both a literal and a figurative sense. We had unmasked the moon as a thief of the sun's light, and as just one rocky companion among many satellites of many planets. We mapped its surface in glorious illuminated detail, and we named its features. It became a place where we could imagine ourselves, because that was fun and newly possible, but also because it was easier, maybe even safer, to play out our human struggles someplace else.
Somnium aims to restore some of the danger, the intensity that centuries of disregard have degraded.
So I'm very keen to see where it goes, and yeah, I'll finish it quite soon, I suspect. So I'll come back and give you my thoughts about it when I've finished.
I've been thinking about Li Bai, the Tang Dynasty poet for whom the moon was an essential recurring image. His poems trace an errant orbit around it, and his life came to an end when, as the legend tells, out boating on a lake at night, he drowned trying to take its reflection in his arms. In one of his most famous poems, Drinking Alone Under the Moon, he makes in his isolation of that celestial body and his own shadow temporary drinking partners. The three revel together in a joyous dance before parting ways, but remain bound together in a transcendent alliance in the heavens.
花間一壺酒，獨酌無相親。舉杯邀明月，對影成三人。月既不解飲，影徒隨我身。暫伴月將影，行樂須及春。我歌月徘徊，我舞影零亂。醒時同交歡，醉後各分散。永結無情遊，相期莫雲漢。
Where Li Bai found in that companionship a way to relinquish earthly desires, another poet, Philip Larkin, up late at night, watching the same moon centuries later, derived from it an opposing message. In the late poem Sad Steps, a very likely drunken encounter with the moon reveals another face. For him, it is austere, high and preposterous and separate, its eternal brightness a kind of mockery of entropic earthly existence, its constancy only serving to deepen the ephemerality of human joys. Though the desire remains, consummation is fled.
Groping back to bed after a piss, I part thick curtains, and am startled by the rapid clouds, the moon's cleanliness. 4 o'clock. Wedge-shaped gardens lie under a cavernous, a wind-picked sky. There's something laughable about this. The way the moon dashes through clouds that blow loosely as cannon smoke to stand apart, stone-colored light sharpening the roofs below. High and preposterous and separate, lozenge of love, medallion of art. O wolves of memory, immensements. No, one shivers slightly, looking up there. The hardness and the brightness and the plain, far-reaching singleness of that wide stare is a reminder of the strength and pain of being young, that it can't come again, but is for others undiminished somewhere.
After doing so much reading about the moon, I'm struck by how much of a kind of lunar vocabulary there is that exists, words that I've not come across before, well, some of which I have, but I've taken on a new light. So I thought it'd be nice to do a little lunar glossary.
I'll begin with a favourite, earthshine or earthlight, the pale or ashen light reflected from the earth that illuminates the dark side of the moon in its new crescent and gibbous phases, its curvature outlined just faintly in the sky. In her prayer journal, the writer, Flannery O'Connor, imagined the moon as God, the shadow cast by the earth as the self. She writes, "Dear God, I cannot love thee the way I want to. You are the slim crescent of a moon that I see, and myself is the earth's shadow that keeps me from seeing all the moon. The crescent is very beautiful, and perhaps that is all one like I am should or could see. But what I am afraid of, dear God, is that my shadow will grow so large that it blocks the whole moon, and that I will judge myself by the shadow that is nothing. Part of me wonders whether an attentiveness to the earth light of the self, to the ashen glow, might have alleviated some of her spiritual pain." Paracynthian, the point at which a spacecraft heading into lunar orbit is closest to the moon's surface. I love this word for its sonorous Greek resonance, its conjuring of the epithet Cynthia for the Greek moon goddess Artemis. Its opposite, the furthest distance, is known as the apocynthian. Lunation, or the synodic month, the time that elapses between new moons, exactly 29 days, 12 hours, and 44 minutes. The passage of the moon, so central to early human timekeeping. The Blanchard bone, believed to have been carved around 32,000 years ago, is thought by some interpreters to be the earliest instance of an attempt to record, to notate lunar cycles, though this remains controversial. Archaeoastronomy, the study of the ways in which ancient peoples have understood the heavens. Lunastice, or lunar standstill, the lunar equivalent of the solstice, the point at which the moon reaches its maximum northerly or southerly point in its revolution, occurring every 18.6 years. This is the phenomenon recorded by the standing stones of the Easter Aquarthes, erected by the Neolithic peoples of what is now Aberdeenshire. In Our Moon, Rebecca Boyle notes that the ancient Greeks discovered the phenomenon several millennia after the ancient people of Aberdeenshire built their lunar megalith, marvelling at the ingenuity of these ancient people.
The orientation of the ancient stones to this multi-decadal cycle is astounding. Nearly 2 decades is lengthy in the life of any modern human. What were you doing 18.5 years ago? For a person living 5,000 years ago, 2 of these 18-year rounds represented late middle age. Constructing a circle whose stones are arranged to embrace the moon every 18.6 years requires advanced planning indeed.
Gardening, more specifically impact gardening or lunar gardening, the term for the bombardment of the moon by meteorites which till the top layer of regolith. Then there is also the marvellous series of prefixes that adorn the moon: circumlunar, translunar, supralunar, sublunar, all of which I particularly adore, and find the image of the translunar gulf especially evocative.
So it's finally a genuinely beautiful day in Warsaw. I fear it might be one of these illusory spring days that get your hopes up and make you imagine that winter is over, when it's really probably not. I'm sure there's more to come. Anyway, it seemed a really nice occasion to come and update you on my reading. I don't know if you can hear the Hare Krishnas in the background who come traipsing through the old town fairly regularly. Just on cue, of course. So I've read quite a lot in these intervening days. I finished Somnium, which I have to say I just utterly adored, and it was such a pleasure to read something so kind of whimsical and sentimental. Its subtitle is A Fantastic Romance, and that's a really accurate description. But I also think it's really quite an ambitious work and quite a serious literary achievement, especially when you consider the different forms that Steve Moore was working in. There's quite an extraordinary fragment of a play in blank verse, which he takes to so easily, so kind of fluently. There's an extraordinary sort of decadent short story in it too, that forms part of the narrative but is its own contained story, and he manages to merge quite a lot of different styles. One major theme that I was talking about the last time I spoke to you was this idea of the tension between the waking world and the world of dreams. And it really struck me that this book isn't really just about that tension, but about an actual choice between the two. Quite a number of his protagonists face a moment where they're forced to choose between those two worlds, and some hesitate, some don't, and it's very much about what one's allegiance is really
to? Is it to the kind of workaday, mundane world, or is it to something more luxurious, more voluptuous, more creative, but far less tangible? The title of the decadent story embedded within the core narrative is telling, being called The Dull World and the Other. It is the tale of a book, an elusive book that infects a library, may hide, disguise itself, even rewrite itself. The young neophyte, Théophile, has been invited to the mansion of a noblewoman, Eugénie, unknowingly at first, to locate that very book. It transpires that the book has the power to open up a portal to another world, a moonlit world of promiscuity, sensual, even devilish delight. When, during a ritual to open up the portal, Eugénie strips naked, daubs herself with arcane, occult symbols, and offers Théophile the chance to follow her into that other world. It is his Catholic upbringing, wrestling with his enormous desire to embrace that otherness, that causes him, just for an instant, to hesitate. And before he is able to answer in the affirmative, Eugénie is gone. The portal is closed. The decision must be full-hearted, full-throated, or it may not be made at all. The choice makes me reflect somewhat upon myself as a reader, what it means to be a reader, placing literature at the center of my life, as though it were a practice of faith, is, I think, for me at least, my full-throated answer to that question. The theme, in some senses, is the central theme of my own life. And I think one of the reasons it's so prevalent is because it's really deeply sort of interlinked with the way that Steve Moore lived his real life. He lived in a world of words and imagination, and didn't really venture beyond Shooter's Hill. You know, there's a brief interlude where he lived elsewhere, but he was born there and he lived in the same house his entire life. But where his real life was lived was very much in a world of dreams. And Alan Moore talks about this quite a lot in both Unearthing and in his Afterword. Alan Moore believes that his friend Steve Moore intended to make Somnium a work about his emotional situation as, in more than one sense of the word, a dreamer, and calls him an author and Somnium a work that have the strength to dream without leaving your bedroom, which is 6 paces from the spot where you were born, to construct such a luminous edifice of narrative, with that narrative itself never venturing more than a few hundred yards from that same bedroom, the strength to insist upon a personal territory of the heart and mind, and then to chart that territory so that other love-wrecked mariners might reach it too. Steve Moore died under a full moon in 2014, 3 years after the publication of Somnium. He wrote that he wished for his ashes to be scattered on the burial mound, the Bronze Age tumulus in Shooter's Hill, by the light of the lovely moon. When I started this reading diary, I said that I wasn't really looking for books that took place on the moon or that were set there. But I don't know, having spent so much time moon gazing with Steve Moore, I feel it's inevitable that we have to set sail and, you know, take some steps on the moon's surface and see how some writers have imagined that space. And it's a space that humanity has imagined endlessly, but which in the mid-20th century made that giant leap from imagination to experience. I say experience and not reality because of quite how unreal astronauts' accounts of its arid landscape can be. Its geographical nomenclature retains the echoes, the vestiges of fantastical image-making. Vast seas on the moon's surface had been imagined by Plutarch, the lunar Maria, defined later in the 17th century by Giovanni Battista Riccioli, the Sea of Crises, the sea of fertility, the marsh of sleep. And 20th century accounts of the surface appear at times no less fantastical, the spatial distortions rendering distance and depth incalculable, the unreal clarity and hard glare of light without an atmosphere to pass through, the extremes of temperature, the decreased gravitational pull, the stark binary interplay of light and shadow, the absence of trees, buildings, any points of orientation. Andrew Chaikin's wonderfully detailed history of the Apollo missions, A Man on the Moon, contains many first-hand accounts of the lunar landscape, its appearance at close orbit. During Apollo 10's orbit, these spatial irregularities become apparent.
Mountains appeared on the horizon. As Stafford and Cernan advanced, they could see that the mountains were actually the rims of huge craters. Enormous boulders dotted the land. Some looked as big as 5-story buildings. After the flight, Stafford would find out they were 10 times that size. There were cliffs that must have been 4,000 or 5,000 feet high. The mountains of the lunar highlands looked close enough to touch.
In Our Moon, Rebecca Boyle also observes the phenomena and their effects.
The moon's craters cast weird shadows, warping the landscape like a funhouse mirror. The extreme contrast between the darkness of space and the bright white of the moon plays tricks on astronaut minds.
Perhaps still more disturbing, she describes the deformation of one's perception of both time and sound.
Time seems to stop up there. It proceeds according to the rhythm of your heart and maybe the beeping of your spacesuit's life support system. But if you could just stand there for an hour or two in silence, you would notice nothing about the passage of time. There are no long shadows cast by the noonday sun. There are no changes in the angle of the light or the speed of the wind. Though the moon has a version of a water cycle, there is no softly falling rain or snow. The sound of a thunderstorm might be one of the earthly experiences you'd miss the most. There is no sound at all. The moon is as quiet gets. You would hear yourself in your spacesuit, and yourself alone.
The feeling of aloneness, of isolated distance, is also a recurring motif in astronauts' accounts. For Apollo 11's Michael Collins, who piloted the command module while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked the lunar dust, this solitude was not a source of fear.
Collins moved through a continual succession of sun-drenched lunar day, soft Earth light, and unyielding blackness. For 48 minutes out of each orbit, from loss of signal to acquisition of signal, he knew a solitude unprecedented in human history. Collins would later write of his far side passages, "I am alone now, truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. I am it. I feel this powerfully, not as fear or loneliness, but as awareness, anticipation, satisfaction, confidence, almost exultation."
But for all that express the majesty of this celestial body, there are an equal number who described its ominous power. During the Apollo 8 flight, when the craft was enveloped by the moon's shadow, William Anders attempted to orient himself by the constellations he could observe, but noticed only a gaping void.
He craned toward the flat glass to look back over his shoulder where they were headed, and he noticed a distinct arc beyond which there were no stars at all, only blackness. All at once, he was hit with the eerie realization that this hole in the stars was the moon.
A number of astronauts have called the lunar landscape forbidding, referred to it as a warning. But the most stirring and disquieting of all is perhaps Aldrin's famous phrase, magnificent desolation. So the book that I've chosen to visit the moon with is Nathan Ballingrud's The Crypt of the Moon Spider. And Nathan Ballingrud is a writer that I'm familiar with. I think I've read pretty much everything he's published. I was a huge fan of the first two collections of stories, North American Lake Monsters and what was originally published as Wounds, I believe, but now has a different title. It's been republished. And I also really enjoyed the sort of transition between those two collections. You could see his sort of allegiances to a certain degree of realism really loosening in the second collection and embracing much more of the purely fantastical and the Gothic and maybe even something quite pulpy. His novel set on Mars, The Strange, I wasn't particularly enamoured of, but even though this book, The Crypt of the Moon Spider, is very much in the mode of that novel, The Strange, I think it's far more successful and far tighter and more assured than that novel was. I suppose it's amusing in some ways that I should have chosen this particular book to visit the moon with, as I put it, because it's not set on the moon in any recognizable sense. This isn't a moon we'd be familiar with. It's very much a fantastical reimagining of that lunar landscape, and we learn, for instance, that it's 1920 and people are already living on the moon. We learn that there are forests there and that there's an alternative mythology surrounding that celestial body. But even though it's not set on the real moon, I couldn't ignore the subtitle of this novella, which is, it's part one of the Lunar Gothic trilogy. And that just spoke to something in my soul, and I couldn't resist. Ballingrud's moon is recognizable at times, with its grey and rubbled plains, but its spectrality and eeriness is enhanced, home as it is to the great woods, a vast forest where a white effluvium coats the trees, blowing in wispy banners in the gusting wind. While flying over it, our protagonist Veronica realizes that the forest is covered in a system of spiderwebs cast over the canopy of every tree, so that it seemed they were flying over a ghostly wood, a revenant returned from darkness. The moon's folklore holds that it was the inhabited skull of a long-dead god who once trod the dark pathways of space like a king through his star-curtained palace. Ballingrud's moon exudes a deathly energy. The book is a really strange amalgam of different modes of narrative style in some ways. There are aspects of it that feel really kind of breezy and pulpy and almost camp. I know that Nathan Ballingrud was perhaps influenced by the EC Comics series, and it has a kind of retro fantastic decayed futurity about it, but at the same time it has a real kind of emotional depth. Its characters are not caricatures by any means, but their plight, and particularly that of Veronica Brinkley, our protagonist, is deeply moving. I think, and addresses some really serious issues around mental health and around this constructed idea of feminine hysteria. As we meet our protagonist Veronica, we learn that she is to stay for a period at the Barrowfield home for treatment of the melancholy. She is deposited there by her irritable and disinterested husband as a result of her black spells, periods of intense depression for which she has no patience or sympathy. What she imagines initially is a kind of rest cure, picturing herself back in Boston, walking arm in arm again with her husband, her mind stitched together by moon filaments, quickly becomes a nightmare of abandonment as her lunar sojourn turns to an exercise in enforced isolation and lunacy at the mercy of the aloof Dr. Cull, whose explanations and ostensible reassurances are as disquieting as they are oblique. She is aware only that she will undergo a surgical procedure, that her brain, her mind, will be interfered with, put right. I caught distinct shades of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper in the novella's treatment of medicalized misogyny, a reminder that the term hysteria finds its etymological roots in the Greek word for womb. And one thing I really loved about it was how sort of protean the moon itself seemed to be through the eyes of our protagonist. There's a sense that as a very young girl, she turned to the moon for comfort and reassurance, that she dreamed of it, she stared up at it and imagined visiting it one day. But once we find ourselves in this institute for the melancholy, the moon takes on a far more forbidding character, and perhaps embodies a kind of horror itself. Veronica's attachment to the moon is apparent from early childhood. She would watch the vast skies of rural Nebraska, streaked and scarred with vessels on their way to the lunar forests, and find in it a source of safety and comfort, even sympathy, composing a lullaby to keep the moon company. Moon, are you lonely? Are you cold? It's all right, moon. I love you. You can live with me. Over time, her shifting relationship with the moon warps with shadow. The dynamic is reversed. On its surface, the dense ranks of trees gathering black air beneath their entangled arms seem much harder to form a comforting attachment to. The black gulf, the endless vault of night grows oppressive, entering her dreams. Now the moon's winds sing to her, rustling the trees, sounding like distant voices, or like the whispers of Galileo's imaginary sea. As the book progresses, the moon's meaning shifts again from oppressive to empowering. It is at times a tool or defensive weapon, a sickle, or a vantage point from which to survey all things, opening its glaring eye. There are also some moments of quite gruesome body horror in this book, moments that made me wince, and made my flesh creep a little, because it deals with some quite invasive surgical processes, but it's not limited to that. There are definitely other modes, other colours of horror that are present within it, particularly around the figures of the alabaster scholars. The book abounds in unsettling images, blurring psychological unease and physical trauma. Disquieting thoughts crawl out of the wet black loam of Veronica's brain, like some horrid new insect, scrabbling unchecked through her mind, eating everything clean and good in her, laying clutches of wet, mucousy eggs. Veronica's surgery leaves her bare scalp a tapestry of cicatrices, her grief reaching such a pitch that she believed it emerged from the fissure in her head like some essential air whistling away. The figures of the alabaster scholars function as a kind of spectral counterpoint to the squelchier, more visceral forms of horror in the book, haunting palely, for the most part, the peripheries of Veronica's consciousness, survivors of a deeper stratum of the moon's history, anemic, blood-drained children of the starless black gulf. I think the writing in the book throughout is really strong. For all its kind of madcap energy and the outrageousness of its premise, there's a subtlety and control to the prose, and lots of quite arresting and beautiful images. There's also some quite impressive handling of the plot, of a certain detail of the plot that's driven via imagery, that's driven via these little echoes between characters' memories. So yeah, I was really quite impressed with it overall. Memory plays a major role in the book. Veronica's childhood, her relationship with her father, her younger years in Nebraska, return over and over. But it's one of the painful aspects of the book that this earthly safety to which Veronica clings so fervently is itself not immune to infection, to the permeation of the moon's spreading ink spot, blackening the purer waters of her mind. I think it was a really nice palate cleanser after the quite expansive and weighty yearning of Steve Moore's Somnium. So yeah, it's a really refreshing book to read. I have a few other sort of lunar books already in my possession, so I need to make up my mind about what I'm going to read next. But yeah, I'm very excited about a few of the candidates. So yeah, we'll talk again when I've made my decision. Meanwhile, I thought it'd be nice to visit this second-hand bookshop where they sell lots of English books. So let's go and see what they have at the books. So I thought I'd just share with you what I picked up at the books. I got three things. I got this biography of Harold Pinter, The Life and Work of Harold Pinter by Michael Billington. I'm not the biggest Pinter fan, but I have been to see a few of his plays and really enjoyed them. In particular, the Hot House at the National Theatre production I saw, maybe 20 years ago, really stood out. But I'm also a big admirer of The Birthday Party, which is a play that I even taught to some of my students, and I think has a really kind of anxiety-inducing energy. Anyway, I wanted to know a bit more about him, so I thought this could be cool to read. Then I picked up The Way of All Flesh by Samuel Butler, which is not a book I know very much about, truthfully. I picked it up mostly because, I've heard that it's quite something. It's quite a special book, but also because I particularly love these Everyman editions, and this was really cheap, and I'm always keen to add one more to my collection. And then finally I got the Bhagavad Gita So all in all, quite a strange selection for me. But this one I picked up largely because of a story by Quentin S. Crisp that I really admire, which is called Suicide Watch, I believe, in which this text features quite heavily. It's not the translation, not the same translation as in that story, but still, I thought it could be worth looking into. So it's March now already, and tonight it's going to be a full moon, which I've been waiting for. I don't know if it'll be visible to me. It might get cloudy, we'll see. And I've also decided what I'm going to be reading. So I've started reading Cesare Pavese's The Moon and the Bonfires, whose connection to the moon, other than the title, I think is a little bit more oblique than those that I've read so far. But I know that it contains a lot of symbolism around the moon, so I'm really curious to trace it as I read through. It's also a novel of homecoming, of returning. It begins with the narrator returning to his home village, and as it would happen, it's become something of an appropriate time for me to read it, because I'll have to go back to London for family reasons this weekend. And yeah, this idea of returning to one's home has inspired lots of different emotions and different thoughts in me. I think it'll be nice to talk about it with you in London if I'm able to. As if to accompany me, the full moon arrives, her lambent body suspended, still and constant, lighting the way ahead. Before I go, I feel the impulse to sing a little something for her. England feels less like home with every passing year. Arriving here, I'm so often seized with that sense of in-betweenness, of unbelonging. Not Polish, no longer fully English. Without a reason to visit the streets on which I grew up, I grow more and more convinced that my native element is the page. At least I look upon the same moon wherever I am. The London I arrive in also seems to be in a strange liminal state between the seasons. Pink blossoms shrouded in fog, flowering trees and gunmetal skies. So I'm in London right now, running between different places, and I thought I'd find a quiet spot to talk to you for a little while. So I'm in this courtyard of a church near Liverpool Street. The day is quite grim and foggy, and it's always quite odd to be back in my home city and to look at it with the eyes of a tourist, which is really how I feel. You know, I crossed the Thames on over Tower Bridge today and looked at the Tower of London as though I'd never seen it before. I'm just so unused to having these, you know, huge medieval structures in the middle of my city. Warsaw is just not like that for obvious reasons. And so, even though the landscape and the weather right here are about as far away as you could get from the Piedmontese countryside in Cesare Pavese's The Moon and the Bonfires, it still feels like a quite an appropriate place for me to be reading it, given that the book is all about returning to a place and finding it utterly changed, both from within and without.
Eel, the protagonist of The Moon and the Bonfires, grows up in the Piedmontese hills, poor and illegitimate, and seemingly without prospects. He will not own land. He will not marry one of his neighbour's beautiful daughters. He is not charismatic or good-looking like his friend Nutto. His is a life on the peripheries, barely registering in the comings and goings of village life. When he returns home, a rich man, having spent a long time abroad in the United States, he faces it with a mixture of deep recognition and alienation. So little seems to have changed, but everything is simultaneously altered. Few recognize his face. The face of the land, however, its fecund textures, aromas and sensory power, remains constant.
Fa un sole su questi bricchi, un riverbero di grillaie e di tuffi che mi ero dimenticato. Qui il caldo, più che scendere dal cielo, esce da sotto, dalla terra, dal fondo tra le viti che sembra si sia mangiato ogni verde per andare tutto in tralcio. È un caldo che mi piace, sa un odore. Ci sono dentro anch'io a questo odore. Ci sono dentro tante vendemmie e fienagioni e sfogliature, tanti sapori e tante voglie che non sapevo più d'avere addosso.
And as I said when I was back in Warsaw, this book has inspired in me lots of ideas and emotions. The most prevalent one being a sort of reflection on how narratives of return have themselves changed utterly within the context of modernity. You know, these grand classical narratives of return, such as the Odyssey, or even something like Exodus, seem to view returning as the kind of end goal for the hero, as it were. You know, that you overcome challenges and face great dangers, and coming home is to achieve nostos. Whereas the trope of returning in late 19th century, or sort of from the late 19th century onwards, and certainly in 20th century literature, seems most often to begin with the moment of arrival, such that arriving itself is no achievement. It seems to be a sort of catalyst for perhaps realizing that return is impossible, that there's a kind of emptiness in the gesture.
I think a lot about what such a structure is really about. If the narrative of return in the context of modernity were truly about place, about home, it would perhaps be a lot simpler. In Odysseus's achievement of nostos, to choose a classical counterpart, there is a sense of circular completion.
So much of the meaning of home is captured in the figure of Penelope, who has remained faithful, fending off her suitors, weaving by day and unravelling by night the funeral shroud of Laertes, to stave off giving her hand upon its completion. But Eel, in the moon and the bonfires, has no wife waiting for him in the village. In fact, no one at all is truly awaiting his return. The land, for all its sensory constancy and the regular agricultural rhythms of village life, is unaffected by his absence or his presence. Eel himself remarks that home means not being alone, knowing that there's something of you in the people, the trees, the land, something waiting for you, even when you're away. Perhaps then the confrontation is with the self or its absence. Such a narrative, published in 1950, as The Moon and the Bonfires was, arrives into a literary landscape with very little space for the heroic in the aftermath of 2 world wars, in the wake of hypersubjectivity, the inward turn of modernism, impressionism, psychoanalysis. Perhaps stability in external reality, stability of meaning, such as the word home is supposed to conjure, must remain elusive. Eel is also returning to an Italian countryside, to an ideologically fractured community, trying to find the meaning of home in the same hills that were the strongholds of resistance fighters, a landscape marred by the blunt trauma of war, and the more insidious forms of trauma resulting from families and communities torn asunder by politics and armed struggle. It's a novel, I think, that questions whether the very concept of home is viable any longer. To return is simultaneously to remember and to arrive for the very first time.
And this novel is engaging with that trope, I think, in really beautiful ways, and it's become one of my favourite instances of that particular circumstance. You know, where the protagonist returns to the village of their childhood and has to confront loss or a kind of traumatic disentanglement from a past self. But this book does it with enormous tenderness, I think. There seems to be an awareness in the protagonist Eel that returning and recapturing the feeling of home is essentially impossible. But nevertheless, he attempts in quite a number of ways to recreate it, not only through sort of experience of the space, but also through some of the people he meets. In particular, there's a young boy who becomes a kind of recapitulation of the protagonist.
Eel's attempts to recapture a sense of home seem often to be thwarted. He states that no one remembers him, no one remembers that he was a farmhand, a bastard, as though his elevation in social status has meant the utter erasure of his past self. He fixates upon the young boy Cinto, in whom he recognizes a certain kinship.
Il ragazzo si alzò dalla ruota, si alzò a fatica, puntando la gamba per traverso. Era zoppo, rachitico. Vidi il ginocchio non più grosso del suo braccio. Si tirava il piede dietro come un peso. Avrà avuto 10 anni e vederlo su quell'aia era come vedere me stesso.
Eel seems to see in Cinto's physical disability echoes of his own emotional and social deprivation, and through his relationship with the boy enacts a kind of retroactive healing of those old wounds, as though he could live his life vicariously anew.
Some of my favourite parts of the book are those that are flashbacks to Eel, the protagonist's time in the United States. There's one particular moment that where his car breaks down out in the desert, and he's left alone to reflect on
on the meaning of America, and I found this section just utterly extraordinary.
Adesso sapevo perché ogni tanto sulle strade si trovava una ragazza strangolata in un'automobile o dentro una stanza o in fondo a un vicolo. Che anche loro, questa gente, avesse voglia di buttarsi sull'erba, di andare d'accordo coi rospi, di essere padrona di un pezzo di terra quant'è lunga una donna e dormirci davvero, senza paura. Eppure il paese era grande, ce n'era per tutti. C'erano donne, c'era terra, c'era denari, ma nessuno ne aveva abbastanza. Nessuno, per quanto ne avesse, si fermava e le campagne, anche le vigne, sembravano giardini pubblici, aiuole finte come quelle delle stazioni, oppure incolti, terre bruciate, montagne di ferraccio. Non era un paese che uno potesse rassegnarsi, posare la testa e dire agli altri: per male che vada mi conoscete, per male che vada lasciatemi vivere. Era questo che faceva paura. Neanche tra loro non si conoscevano. Traversando quelle montagne si capiva a ogni svolta che nessuno lì si era mai fermato, nessuno le aveva toccate con le mani. Per questo un ubriaco lo caricavano di botte, lo mettevano dentro, lo lasciavano per morto. E avevano non soltanto la sbornia, ma anche la donna cattiva. Veniva il giorno che uno, per toccare qualcosa, per farsi conoscere, strozzava una donna, le sparava nel sonno, le rompeva la testa con una chiave inglese.
Of course, I've been trying to trace the lunar symbolism and lunar imagery throughout the book, and there is quite a lot of it, even though this book, as I said, deals with the moon in far more oblique ways than some of the other books that I've talked about so far. But the really curious thing I find about it is how the meaning of the moon as a symbol in the book is altered according to the context in which it appears, such that it can have, I think, meanings that are almost in direct opposition to one another. It can stand for something like aridity and distance. It can stand for violence and also, tender or sexual longings, and also stand as a symbol of belonging and having a kind of insider's perspective on village life.
The moon illuminates so many pages of the novel. In the opening chapters, the moon appears to symbolize distance, isolation. In a bar in the United States, Eel falls into conversation with a native of the Piedmontese hills, whom he recognizes immediately as one of his own, despite never having laid eyes upon him. In an offhand comment about the inability to find good wine, Eel remarks that living in the United States is like living on the moon. The violence in what Donald Heine, in his essay Pavese, The Geography of the Moon, calls the lunar landscape of America, is deepened in a scene when Eel drives out into the desert, becomes stranded, and looks up at the sky.
Sembrava che tutta la pianura fosse un campo di battaglia. C'era una luce rossastra. Scesi fuori, intirizzito e scassato, tra le nuvole basse era spuntata una fetta di luna che pareva una ferita di coltello e insanguinava la pianura. Rimasi a guardarla un pezzo. Mi fece davvero spavento.
In a moment of supreme isolation, the moon, in this pitiless image, becomes a hostile focal point for Eel's sense of rootlessness. Heine remarks that Eel grasps that there is more than one way of being rootless, that the Americans are linked together in some strange and invisible way he will never understand, because their rootlessness is not his own. Whatever his blood is, it is not the pale and chemical substance that flows in the veins of the Americans. Upon returning to his village, the moon once again stands between Eel and his sense of belonging, as in his conversation with his old friend Nutto.
Allora credi anche nella luna? La luna, disse Nuto. Bisogna crederci per forza. Prova a tagliare a luna piena un pino. Te lo mangiano i vermi. Una tina la devi lavare quando la luna è giovane. Perfino gli innesti, se non si fanno ai primi giorni della luna, non attaccano.
Eel realizes that he regards such folk wisdom as a barrier to progress, superstitions keeping the people in a state of woeful ignorance. He asks what was the point of him banging on about the government and the priests if he believed the same superstitions his grandmother's parents had. Such superstitious beliefs, however, are buried deep in Eel's upbringing and psyche and become a kind of prerequisite for his reabsorption into the life of the village, work according to the phases of the moon, bonfires to wake up the land.
Ma prima di parlare dovevo ridiventare campagnolo. Anche la storia della luna e dei falò la sapevo, soltanto m'ero accorto che non sapevo più di saperla.
There's also a very strong political dimension to the idea of finding home utterly transformed. The book seems to be grappling really intensely with what fascism did to Italy and the way that it tore apart communities when some young men and women decided to be collaborators and others decided to form part of to join the resistance movement in the hills in this part of the country. While Pavese was no resistance fighter, in his introduction, the translator Tim Parks remarks that he could make some small claim to be on the side of the subversives, though he was never engaged in any anti-fascist activity. His work as a translator, mostly of American literature, was itself regarded as a form of political agitation by the 1930s. His most severe brush with the authorities came through his relationship with Tina Pizzardo, whom he asked to marry him. Tim Parks goes on. Tina didn't give him an immediate answer, but asked him if she could receive letters from an imprisoned agitator sent to him at his address. When his house was raided in May 1935 and the letters discovered, Pavese was arrested and imprisoned. At his trial, he could hardly defend himself by saying that the letters were not meant for him, since that would mean betraying Tina and putting at risk the relationship upon which he felt his manhood depended. So he took the rap, a sentence of 3 years internal exile. Within a year, when he had still received no response from Tina, he wrote to the fascist authorities, even directly to Mussolini himself, explaining that he was in no way opposed to fascism, and he appealed for clemency, which he received. When he arrived in Turin, he discovered that Tina was to be married to another. This bending of political conviction in the name of romance paints a rather tragic figure, and indeed, his romantic life appears never to have truly taken flight. Not even Mussolini could help him there. James Attlee, in his wonderful book Nocturne, A Journey in Search of Moonlight, notes that Mussolini had an intense but problematic relationship with the moon. He cites the influence in Mussolini's childhood of La Vecchia Giovanna, regarded by many as a witch, whose beliefs went beyond the usual country knowledge concerning the planting of crops according to the moon's phases, as appears in Pavese's The Moon and the Bonfires. For her, the planet was a powerful and sometimes malevolent force, its light not so much a source of illumination as a dangerously potent agent of change. Mussolini was convinced of the dangers of falling asleep where the light of the moon could fall on his face. Blinds remained drawn, even in the most sweltering Roman summers. It was as if he thought that, like Endymion, he risked becoming bewitched, his energy and virility sapped away as he lay tangled in a cobweb of moonbeams. Attlee sees Mussolini's downfall as a grotesque fulfillment of the fear he held throughout his life, noting that his body, along with that of his mistress, Carla Petacci, was taken to the Piazzale Loreto in Milan and strung up by the heels from one of Marinetti's shining, humming globes, the street lights that his futurist supporters hoped would banish moonlight from the city forever. This character, who in life had dealt with symbols as fluently as a tarot player, became in death a mute, hermetic symbol, the hanged man beneath the unpitying eye of an electric moon, exposed to the blows and mockery of the crowd.
I finished the book last night, and it's one that I read very, very slowly, which is partly because I've had some family things to deal with here in England, but also because the book demands that of the reader, I think. It contains very little action in its present tense, apart from really right towards the end. It's very much a sort of reflective novel, and so it demands this reflective pace. And I found myself just savouring certain chapters because I was enjoying it so much. And when I finished it last night, I felt almost bereft, like I was suddenly missing something, which doesn't happen too often for me, but I think it's always a sign that I've read something pretty special when that happens. Tomorrow I'll be visiting a family member on the coast, in a town called Clacton on Sea. I'm not sure I'll be filming anything tomorrow, so we'll see. But if not, I'll catch you again with the next book, and let you know soon what I've decided to read next. I have a few things in mind. Some quite intriguing things for me, so we'll see. Also, after reading Somnium, I could hardly come to London without making a little pilgrimage in the name of Steve Moore, and so I decided to make my way to Shooter's Hill. Let's see what we can find here. I begin in the old-growth forest of Oxley's Wood. This tract of ancient deciduous wood feels different. Time radiates palpably from the moss-strewn branches, deep shades of emerald, malachite. Today, amid sheets of heavy fog, the spring blossoms take on a fragile aspect that belies their ancient vigour. Alan Moore walked with Steve Moore through these woods, so close to the home of one of my favourite writers, Algernon Blackwood, while working on Unearthing. During an interview on my good friend Jack McEnroy's podcast, South London Hardcore, which he ran with the late Steve Walsh, Alan Moore discussed the fieldwork conducted towards the project and its psychogeographical underpinnings.
When I'd started planning the work, I realised that I was going to need some reference about Shooter's Hill and its history, which I was able to dig up with Steve's help from various sources. I was also going to need Steve's memory of his own life. Luckily, he's the kind of anal retentive guy who's kept journals of everything, including his dreams, for over 30 years, So I wasn't without reference material. But I've been going there since I was 14, and the mystique of the area, I'd had plenty of time to soak that up. I knew about Algernon Blackwood having his birthplace over in Oxley's Woods. I knew about the surrounding areas, about the highwayman stories, about Caesar having made his first invasion of Britain over the top of Shooter's Hill, and Julius Agricola, about 50 years later, his more successful invasion. All of this stuff, we just sort of soaked it all up. I was lucky enough to find what the geological underpinnings of Shooter's Hill are, and this fantastic fact that Shooter's Hill created London.
Yeah.
That if a chalk fault hadn't collapsed on the north face of Shooter's Hill, that was what gouged out the Thames Valley. Without a Thames Valley, no Thames. Without a Thames, no London.
Unearthing captures an image of Steve Moore and Shooter's Hill locked in oniric symbiosis.
He dreams his room. He dreams the 3x5-inch portrait of the goddess within misting distance of his slumbering whips. He dreams the hill. The hill dreams London.
I make my way up the sloping path to reach the clearing where Sevendrew Castle looms imposingly in the mist. Building began in 1784 to commemorate Sir William James, who gained a victory for the East India Company Navy at Savannah-Durg Fort in 1755. Despite its grim and violent corporate pedigree, I'm interested in Sevendrew Castle for its place in Steve Moore's imagination and its role in Somnium. This is the spot where Christopher Morley spends his first night in the erotic embrace of Cynthia Brown Eyes. Sevendrew spent many decades in a state of disrepair, its entrances boarded up, its walls stained with graffiti. For much of Steve Moore's life, this is the state in which he would have known it. Its restoration would occur only later, and it was reopened to the public in July 2014, just 3 months after Steve Moore's death. It's invigorating to know that long before this, he had already enacted Sevendrew's restoration in his imagination, immortalizing it in Somnium. I make my way up to the viewing platform, where, on a clear day, I'm told, one has a magnificent view that takes in the entirety of London. Today, however, a sky as white as clay and no sun. Birds, a flaring of black branches and fog. I like it like this, and yet a part of me longs to stand here on a clear night, under the light of a dreaming moon. With the aid of a map from the early 19th century, an attendant knowledgeable in Shooter's Hill lore directs me to the Bull Inn, the spot where Christopher Morley lodges and composes his diary. It's closed, so I'm unable to stop for the pint I promised myself in his honour. But it's nice to watch the painted sign swaying in the soft wind. I make the short trip from the inn to Steve Moore's home, the home where he was born, where he spent his entire life, where he worshipped and loved Selene and dreamed his tapestries of moonlight. Looking upon this unassuming home in this tucked-away cul-de-sac on the periphery of South London, I'm reminded of how invisible the visions of others might be, how poetry must coexist with a collage of mundanity, and yet marvel at the way mundanity is able to function as the seedbed that gives rise to poetry's glistening, fruiting body.
It doesn't matter how dull or grey or forgettable you think that these little urban corners are, that no matter where they are, if you look at them with an incisive enough eye, with a sympathetic enough eye, then you can find imagery and words and concepts that are impossibly rich. I mean, considering that this is talking about one man
living in one house. Yeah.
In one house, in one very restricted little area of London, I think that the kind of material that we have unearthed is treasure.
Finally, I visit the Bronze Age tumulus, the burial mound that Steve Moore imagined consecrated Shooter's Hill's tutelary deity. Whenever he passed it on his morning walks, he would bid good morning to the local god, and it was here that he requested his ashes be scattered. So, just for a moment, I too can become an offering to the local gods and goddesses, and merge my essence with the native soil before all that remains of me is blown away and scattered like oak leaves on the whirling wind. Before I leave London, I step inside this little second-hand bookshop in Peckham. It's very affordable. There's no order whatsoever to the shelves. But no matter what, I always seem to leave this place with something. So in Peckham, I picked up two things. I picked up this really quite handsome edition of John Fowles's The Ebony Tower. I really like John Fowles, actually. I think he's someone who stands out very much as part of a kind of mainstream of English publishing in the 1960s and 70s. Well, further than that, but still. He's always struck me as someone who's really ambitious and tries to sort of rupture a kind of parochialism that comes along with being English, I think. So I'm excited about this one. And then I picked up something that I guess will be mostly a reference work for me. So something I'm probably not going to read cover to cover, but this is the complete works of Emerson. I first encountered Emerson at university on a course entitled American Romanticism, and he really blew me away, I have to say, this essay, Nature, which is still something that I return to quite often. Yeah, just such a wonderful stylist, so to have all his work in one place seemed to me definitely a good thing. So I'm back in Warsaw now, just taking a little walk down by the Wisła. It's quite a pretty day. In London I didn't see much of the moon or the sun. It was a really misty, foggy period, so at least one of the two is back today. So I think I'm about ready for the final entry into this lunar reading diary. At least I think it will be the final one. And having looked at the moon from various angles in literature, you know, we've looked at an exploration of lunar goddesses. We've flown to the surface of the moon. We've thought about lunar symbolism. I thought it would be nice to look at a particular creature that has a very strong relationship with the moon. So I'm reading right now S.P. Somtow's Moon Dance, which is a book all about werewolves. I'm sure I know that there's an awful lot of werewolf novels out there. You know, I'm aware of a few like Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones, and there's another that I picked up with, you know, as a potential entry for this diary by Rachel Yoder. It's called Night Bitch. But something about this book and its sort of epic historical approach to werewolves really sparked my interest, and so I thought I would explore it. Moondance imagines a convergence, a land dispute between two clans of werewolves in the late 19th century. One among the nobility amid the snowdrift spires of Eastern and Central Europe. The other, an older strand of werewolf culture, deep in the plains of Dakota, the Black Hills stretching into Wyoming, down to the sand hills of Nebraska. The narrative focuses on a young boy, Johnny Kindred, a schizophrenic and the illegitimate son of a Viennese count, head of the European werewolf clan, as he journeys in the care of his governess, Speranza, across the ocean to the United States, and grows slowly to understand his true nature. The frame narrative, which takes place in the 1960s, sees a young journalist encountering Johnny Kindred as an old man in a psychiatric ward, housed there to quell his murderous desires. So I did come into this book with a degree of trepidation. I did something that I don't always do and read quite a few Goodreads reviews of it, and lots of people seem to be appalled by it in various ways, whether that's to do with some gleeful violence that it contains, or kind of woeful characterization, stilted and atrocious prose. That, you know, those are some ways in which people have characterized it. So I didn't go into it expecting to encounter a great stylist exactly, but something about its sort of epic scale and its subject matter and the way in which its chapters are organized according to the phases of the moon made it kind of irresistible for me. And it got me thinking a little bit about how I respond generally to writing that doesn't value elegance of style particularly highly, and the reasons why I might still admire a writer who doesn't possess that particular quality. Because most of the time, in most of what I read or I seek out does place an emphasis on beauty, on the aesthetics of language itself. That's normally where my taste lies, but there are exceptions to that. I even posted a question on the YouTube community tab asking, you know, how people felt about this. Can they persist with a book that they considered to be quite poorly written? And people were chiming in with writers with whom that's the case. One person mentioned Philip K. Dick, which I think is a fantastic example, because he's someone whose pure imagination, the strength of his ideas, are able to carry his narratives in a way that his prose simply can't on its own. Another writer like that for me, and I don't know, maybe some people will quibble with this, but David Lindsay, the writer of A Voyage to Arcturus, I find quite painful to read, honestly. But the sheer majesty of his imagination is what carries me through his books. And so I wondered if S.P. Somtow could be of that ilk somehow. So I'm about 150 pages into this quite sizable novel. It's well over 500 pages. And I've really tried to approach it with an open mind, despite some of those criticisms that I've read of the book, and you know, some of which I really have to acknowledge. The opening section of the book doesn't really present it in the most favourable light. There's some fairly dire misogynistic characterization going on, but I always like to focus on those things that I can find to admire in a book, and there is plenty here. I very much enjoy S.P. Somtow's treatment of the subject matter, his approach to the figure of the werewolf, the meaning of the werewolf itself. he allows it to function as a kind of embodiment of all that is bestial and taboo and transgressive in human desire. It seems very much a kind of expression of the subconscious.
SP Somtau's werewolves are creatures of impulse and desire, their libido, their bloodthirst, phase-locked to the waxing and waning of the moon, creatures of wild abandon, who even in human form retain the ghost of their animal habits, their animal stench, their unbridled sexuality. Theirs is a world of urine, blood, sweat, putrescence, clawing copulation, darkening the dust with piss to mark their territory. And while there is a poetry to this condition under the low-hanging moon, bloated and deathly white, the light of moonbeams bending, iridescing, there is much that revels in the ugliness of dismemberment, defilement, and horror. The boy wolf urinated on the corpse now, howling. He danced on the body. He tore out the heart and worried at it, chewed on it, spat out the grisly aorta. He rolled in the chest cavity and emerged, soaked with blood. And yet such desires contain the unmistakable whiff of humanity, and they certainly do not fall without its compass, but perhaps sit within the deeper part of human longing that is forcibly suppressed, locked in carefully sequestered corners of the psyche, into which only very few choose to peer.
And there's something distinctly Freudian about it. It's no coincidence, surely, that Freud himself appears when some of the characters reach Vienna, even if he does spend most of his time on the page trying to get other people to take cocaine.
Occasionally, the werewolves will speak this human truth plainly. In the Viennese Count's words, there is that in us which is beyond shame, beyond the repressive trappings of civilized society. Men imprison their bestial selves, as a woman cages her body within a whalebone corset. We are more truly alive than they.
He also, in some really quite interesting ways, presents a sort of depth of culture within these sort of werewolf tribes, as it were, and a really expansive view of it across the entirety of the northern hemisphere so far.
The two factions of the werewolves are depicted in curious ways. Those who dwell among the European nobility are urbane, cautious, having lived a double life for centuries. But they have also absorbed the colonial ideals of their milieu, their drive for capitalistic conquest. They are served by humans who have sworn allegiance to the werewolves and bear the brand of wolfsbane on their hands. Those in North America are ritualistic, moral and spiritual, custodians of a deeper, more ancient culture. Watching Johnny Kindred navigate the transition between these two worlds in tandem with his own bestial awakening is one of the pleasures of the book.
He's also really good at forging a kind of inner world of the werewolf, the sort of moonlit dreamscape in which all of those suppressed urges, all of those unexpressed desires begin to emerge.
An inner world like a forest, not the picture book forest of fairy tales, but a forest of gnarled trees knotted with rage, of writhing vines, of earth pungent with piss and putrescence, of clammy darkness. At the very centre of the forest there was a clearing. The circle was the centre of the world, and it was bathed in perpetual pallid moonlight.
So while it's really not the most subtle of books, and it's quite clunky at times, I'm finding a lot of sort of scope and imagination in it, and a lot to really enjoy. So I'm curious to see where it goes. I'll come back and talk to you about it when I'm finished. The book also has me wanting to rewatch An American Werewolf in London for the first time in God knows how long, probably about 20 years. Incidentally, let me know if you have any favourite werewolf movies, excluding Teen Wolf, of course. I take a walk along Krakowskie Przedmieście to visit the statue of Copernicus that stands before Stashid's palace. The learned astronomer sits poised with compass and armillary sphere, his gaze fixed upon something others cannot see. The moon played a major role in his development of the heliocentric theory. It was the moon's occultation of Venus in 1529 that sowed important seeds that would eventually blossom with enough virulence to tear apart the Ptolemaic model. So it's a Saturday morning and I'm in Mariensztat, which is one of my favourite parts of Warsaw. I think because nobody ever comes here really. You don't really see people around, even though it's really central and its architecture is some of the older in the city left over. The moon is in a waxing gibbous phase right now. I seemed to sort of lose sight of it earlier in the month, but I looked up at it again the night before last. It was sort of shrouded in cloud cover, but really bright. And you know, it seems to be making appearances in the world around me somehow. The Artemis launch is a few days away, and I'm curious to kind of keep track of that. And it was also the end of Ramadan recently, the Eid celebrations, which is all based around the Islamic lunar calendar. So about a week or so ago, I finished Moon Dance, the SP Somtau book I was reading, and it's such a strange beast that I hardly know how to talk about it, honestly. It's not a book that I'm going to be able to sort of fully endorse for anyone to read. But I'm glad that I experienced it, and usually I don't talk about books about which I'm not, sort of head over heels on this channel. That's not really why I make these videos. But I guess a reading diary is a little bit different, and you just take things as they come. But yeah, I'll focus on the things that I found interesting about it, and there's certainly a lot in here to enjoy. I think the last time I spoke to you about it, I was saying that it seemed like it was, expanding, and it was going to continue to expand, and that's certainly true. It spreads out all over Europe, and North America in particular becomes much more prevalent. And it turns effectively into a kind of werewolf weird western, which is not a genre, not a genre I ever expected to encounter, honestly. And yeah, it is interested in sort of relations between European colonizers, settlers, and Native American peoples, but recast
in a sort of war of the werewolves kind of mode, in ways that echo the Sioux Wars in the mid to late 19th century. And it does seem like S.P. Somtal's heart is in the right place when presenting that parallel. So that's positive, but there's some sort of interesting kind of maybe a little bit naive and oversimplified presentation of Native American culture.
While the chapters exploring the Native American werewolves are some of the most interesting in the book, Somtal occasionally falls into the trap of presenting them in the mould of the noble savage, and offers a slightly unreconstructed view of indigenous cultures that can sit somewhat uncomfortably. It can be difficult to read the Native American werewolves as anything other than recastings of rather unpleasant stereotypes, and this feels somewhat unfortunate.
One thing the book really reminded me of, strangely enough, was the sort of narrative. I found sort of echoes of the narrative of Frank Herbert's Dune in it, particularly in the character of Paul Muad'Dib, and the central protagonist of S.P. Somtal's book. There's this very interesting migration of allegiances from a sort of old world to a new world culture, and I found that really interestingly drawn, particularly in those parallels that I observed where we kind of get access to to that transition from the inside. We really have access to the protagonist's inner world as his worldview alters and shifts and expands.
Like Paul Muad'Dib, who undergoes a kind of awakening in the realization of his power as he throws in his lot with the fate of the Fremen, Johnny Kindred undertakes a similar journey, recognizing a subtle but growing, undeniable response to a more ancient music.
One really interesting thing that the book does with the moon, which is very different to any of the other books that I've looked at so far, is that it employs its phases as a kind of structural device, a kind of natural structuring device for the sort of peaks and troughs of the narrative, and does so quite effectively, I think.
Somtal's employment of the phases of the moon as a structuring device lends the book a certain sinusoidal contour, rendering a series of climaxes whose approaches come with the crushing inevitability of tides. Episodes of violent release punctuate the narrative. The book inhales, holding its breath, delaying the carnage of its inescapable exhalation. Its structure feels organic because of this.
The moon is really prevalent as a motif and figure in the book. Lunar imagery. The moon is utterly inseparable from werewolf folklore. It's kind of profoundly connected to it and unavoidable. But this book does some really curious things with it in its invention of a werewolf culture. And particularly the ways in which the moon figures in the sort of dream world of the werewolves themselves, and those characters that feel a certain kinship with the werewolves. And there's also a sort of culmination of the book's narrative in the titular moon dance, which everything seems to be kind of leading up to.
The rain turned to sleet, the sky was grey, grey the tall grass, ash grey the dancers' faces. They danced against the wind. Often it seemed that the dancers' feet did not touch the ground, and even the horses floated on a cushion of mist. Time itself was streaming by. Autumn into winter, into spring, into brilliant summer. The light swirled about the boy's head. He was growing in stature. Now he seemed on the brink of adolescence. Now it was summer, and the grass rustled and his golden hair was flung back as the hot wind raced over the plain. And now it was autumn, and the wind stripped the leaves from the oaks and roared, and the grass was matted with rain. Still the boy danced, and the men danced joyfully, leaping like young wolves, eager for the hunt. And the women joined in the choruses with howls of hunger and desire.
I don't want to dwell too much on the book's flaws, really, but some of the things that stop me from enjoying it are perhaps some very sort of lazy characterization, the sort of cliche-riddled dialogue that kind of pockmarks the book, and a really inconsistent prose style that ranges from some real lyrical beauty to very kind of turgid and frankly quite dull passages. And when you're dealing with a book that's almost 600 pages, it can try your patience somewhat, let's say. So, unfortunately, I was quite pleased when the book was finally over, which is not always the best sign. But maybe some people will be intrigued enough to give it a go, and if you do, let me know what you thought of it, and or if you've read it before, let me know in the comments. I'd be really curious to see what other people think about the book.
I've spent a long time now tidally locked in a dance with the moon's radiant body, her face fixed forever upon me, even in moments when she appears lost, sometimes for days at a time, enveloped in cloud cover, sunk beyond the horizon. She is there, illuminating a hidden hemisphere of my being. And I think of Rebecca Boyle's closing words of Our Moon. You will always be able to trust in the moon. It will always be above you. It will always return, quietly lighting the night for you, peering through the clouds in the morning for you. You will be able to count on its inconstant appearance. You can be sure that it will rise, cool and glimmering, sometime tomorrow. You'll be able to see it from wherever you are here on Earth, the moon's home, its eternal companion, its cloud-wisped sister and reason for being. Walk outside under the moon tonight or tomorrow morning. Look up, walk along with it, and say hello.
So I think I'm going to end my little reading diary there this time. And I just wanted to say, if you made it all the way to the end, thanks so much for watching. And if you do enjoy these videos, I put countless hours of work into them, and they take me a really long time and a lot of effort to make. So I'd be really grateful if you could share it with someone who you think might care about this stuff in the same way that you and I do. Perhaps you could share it with a bookish friend or post it somewhere online. That kind of thing really helps me out. And of course, once again, if you have books in mind that do really interesting things with the moon, I'd be really, really curious to hear about them. So let me know in the comments. Okay, I have a few ideas for my next projects, and until then, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.